believe that being a defender requires more than building shooting skills on a range. It's also a development of the heart, mind, body, and spirit. Join us as we explore what it truly means to be a defender in your training and in your everyday life. Welcome to Defenders Live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Defenders Live. I'm your host, Laura Thorson, and tonight I'm going to be sharing a special interview that I did recently with my dear friend, Lisa Stiers of Pacwest Defense. Lisa's story resonates with so many people and resonates with me as well. And the story that she's going to be sharing is the truth about domestic violence. I was so honored to have her share her story with me, and I hope that it helps someone out there who may be going through a similar experience. And even if it's not something you can personally relate to, I guarantee that you'll gather something from her story that you can take away. So as usual, please make sure that you comment throughout the show. If you have anything that you would like to interject, and let me know where you're watching from. I always want to hear from you guys. And stay tuned till the end, because at the end, we'll be providing you with some resources. And I'll save my announcements until then, and what to expect for next week's show, because that will be a good one as well. So I will see you on the other side. If you, for some reason, you can't hear this, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you when this interview is done. Tonight we have Lisa Stiers on the show. Lisa grew up with firearms, having shot her first gun at age 5 with her dad's help. Lisa purchased a gun for self-defense at age 25 after being in an abusive relationship. She eventually let her permit expire, and in 2010, after multiple close call situations while living in the Portland area, she decided to purchase a handgun again for personal protection and everyday carry. She began regular training with her firearm and eventually came across a ladies only group that she began shooting with. After shooting for a few years, she began teaching friends how to shoot. Lisa quickly realized she had a knack for working with people and a passion for helping others learn to protect themselves. She decided to focus her energy on teaching other civilians how to defend themselves. In 2018, Lisa established her company, Pacwest Defense Firearms Training. That year, she also began working part-time as a range safety officer and instructor at a local gun club, actively teaching with the club's practical application team. She helps teach a new member evaluation class that focuses on marksmanship and safety, as well as Handgun Fundamentals, Action Shooting Fundamentals, Action Range Certification classes, concealed carry, and more. In 2019, Lisa began volunteering her time as a co-leader with another female instructor for her local ladies-only shooting group. And in May 2020, Lisa began working full-time as the chief range safety officer at that same gun club. She now manages a team of 20 RSOs and has brought multiple women onto that team. In addition to this, Lisa has continued teaching while also expanding her knowledge and skills as a shooter and instructor. In 2021, she became a chapter facilitator for A Girl and a Gun, where she hosts sessions in Sherwood, Oregon. In her spare time, Lisa enjoys shooting at local competitions, focusing primarily on speed steel and IDPA. Let's welcome my good friend Lisa onto the show. Hey, Lisa.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
Great. I'm so excited to have you on the show because I feel like you and I have a special connection. And we started that connection when we were involved in the active self-protection instructor certification program. We were in the same cohort together. And I just found you to be so insightful, very thoughtful, and incredibly present with people. And I imagine that those same skills and traits you bring into your firearms training as well when you're working with students. And so part of, I believe, what makes you such a great instructor are those intuitive skills that you have. And not to downplay the like outright skill that you have as a shooter, but you have a special quality that I think draws people to you. So I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
We have a lot to unpack though. So
Yeah.
I think that because of your background with domestic abuse specifically, I want to get into that a little bit later, but I want to start at the beginning. So, could you unpack for us? Because we want to get to know you better. I really want people to know who you are, what you're about, and your mission going forward, because I know that that's important to you. So, could you start at the beginning and kind of give us an idea of how you grew up?
Yeah. So I grew up in a home with my mom and my dad and my brother. Um, what I always thought of as a fairly normal household until I grew up and got older. Um, my dad was an alcoholic, is an alcoholic to this day. Uh, he Up until I was 16, 17 years old, my dad worked nights, graveyard shift. So he wasn't home a lot. He wasn't an absentee father. He was he was working when we were home. He was, when we were sleeping, he was at work. When we'd get up, he'd come home and he'd be in bed already. So we didn't see him a lot except for on the weekends. Um, and on those weekends, he was usually having poker parties and drinking with his buddies. Uh, and so I grew up seeing a lot of that, hearing a lot of stories, military stories, and things that children really shouldn't be hearing about.
Mhm.
Um, my dad ran around with a fairly unsavory type crowd, which meant occasionally those people were at the house. Um, what I spent the last probably 30, 35 years thinking was a lifelong uh, history of nightmares. I always uh, I always thought I had nightmares growing up as a kid, and didn't sleep well, have sleep issues. And a couple of years back, my brother and I were at my mom's visiting, and we were talking about dreams and nightmares. And I was telling my mom and my brother about a recurring dream or nightmare that I used to have a lot, especially as a child. And my mom interrupted me, and she's like, "But Lisa, those were memories. Those were not nightmares. Those were memories."
You're
Um,
kidding me.
and so to unpack that, um, there was an individual that my dad was an acquaintance with, and he knew my dad's work schedule. And this person had an obsession with my mom. And
Wow.
he used to break into the house at night and creep through the house and assault my mom when us kids were in bed. And there were several times where I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I always insisted on having a little light on in the kitchen or in the hallway because I was always scared of the boogeyman. And I would tend to wake up and sometimes hear noises, and I couldn't figure out what those noises were. Um,
Wow.
and then one night I woke up and I saw a shadow being cast on my bedroom door, and my door was open about halfway. And I just remember thinking, it's the boogeyman, right? He's
Mm.
coming for me. And just as the shadow started breaking through the door and into my bedroom, um, I freaked out, and because I had been frozen, unable to speak or call out for my mom, and unable to do anything. And just as the boogeyman started to cross the threshold into my bedroom door, I started thrashing around, and I knocked something over, made a lot of noise, and poof, boogeyman was gone. My mom's in my room a few minutes later turning on the light. And I
Wow.
told her, I said, the boogeyman was here. He was trying to get me. Um,
How old were you then?
about 5 or 6.
Oh gosh.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so that kind of thing kept happening. My mom's like, "It's a bad dream. Go back to sleep here. You can come sleep in my bed and you'll be fine."
Oh, so she
Uh,
told you it was a bad dream back then.
Back then, she told me it was a bad dream, right?
Oh,
Um, that kind of thing continued on for I don't know how long, and then
wow.
a couple years go by, and um, occasionally my mom would wake us up in the middle of the night, me and my brother, and she'd be like, "Guys, come, we're gonna have a slumber party in my room. Let's all sleep in my room." My parents had a king size bed, and we'd all pile into my mom's room, and then we'd close the door and we would move the bed in front of the bedroom door, and it
Wow.
was it was a game,
Right.
and
She was
right,
making it a game. Yeah.
right, she was making into a game.
Yeah.
Well, she was keeping us with her and keeping us safe. The guy couldn't get in if the
Yeah.
door was in the way. The bed was in the way of the door, and fast forward a little more, and my mom comes home with a couple of German Shepherd puppies, and she's like, "These are guard dogs, and they're gonna help." And she told my dad, "The kids have been scared. They've been having bad dreams, and I thought we needed a dog." And my dad was like, "Oh no, we don't. Absolutely not. We're not getting two German Shepherds." Well, we ended up keeping one, and it was a Schutzen. This puppy came from a long line of Schutzen trained German Shepherds, guard dogs, and that was the last. I really remember a lot of that stuff happening, the whole boogeyman thing. But over the years, as I was growing up, there were many times where my mom and I would go to the grocery store, come back, and the back door was open, or
Wow.
um, people would have broken in while we were gone. And there
Wow.
was there was one night my mom and I were up really late into the night. I was probably 14 at this point. Again, my dad's at work and he's not to be found. Um, and my mom and I had been up really, really, really late into the middle of the night talking, and we were sitting on the couch in the living room, and it was like, okay, let's go to bed. It's late. And I walked towards the front door, and something told me, go make sure the door's locked. And so, just as I was reaching my hand to double check the deadbolt, I saw the doorknob do this from the outside. And my mom was two steps behind me. We both froze. And um, it was just startling. But then the dog came. We had another dog at this point. Dog came around and started barking, and then my brother woke up, lights turned on, and he went out and checked it out. He had his little samurai sword, and he went outside and checked it out, and there was nobody there. Um,
Hmm. Well, there
but
was.
there had been,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but fortunately, the dog had scared whoever it was off, and
I have a
then
couple of questions really quick, but I want
yeah,
you to keep
yeah.
going. First, did your dad know this was going on? And I'm curious also how many brothers and sisters that you have.
I have one older brother. He's about a year and 10 months older than me.
Okay.
Um, the way I understand it is that my dad eventually found out that this was happening. He found out when my mom brought the dogs home, the German Shepherds home.
Okay.
Um, Apparently, this man had threatened my mom. Right? If you say anything, I'll kill you. I'll kill your children. Um, and don't know
And
how
your
to get
dad
in.
knew this guy.
Yeah,
So he was a
and
local guy and
yeah, and so
so
he
he
knew
wasn't
my
going away.
not for a long time. um, but eventually, my mom told my dad, and we got the dog. We kept a dog, and we installed cyclone fencing all around the property, and gates and security lights, and all of that. Which I didn't think much of it at the time. I was a kid.
Mhm.
But now later looking back on it, it's like, oh, okay, it makes sense. Um,
God, that would be so I mean, you being a kid at that time, right, that's can't imagine going through that, but then I think about your mom and the position she was in, right?
mhm.
Wow, crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going. I'm processing all of this here.
That's okay. Anyway, over the years, there were just there were a handful of times where, we'd have home invasions. We'd be gone and we'd come back and the door was open.
Wow.
Things had been moved. There was one time where we entered in through the garage, the shop door, which is at one end of the house, and we're dumping off stuff in grocery bags. Like, here, this goes in this room, that goes in that room, and the bedrooms were on the opposite end of the house of where we entered, and we went into every room in the house putting things away, and then we went back out to the car to get more stuff. The only room that we hadn't gone into was my room. My mom dropped stuff off in her bedroom. My brother dropped off stuff in his bedroom. We dropped stuff off in the bathrooms, the kitchen, all these things. The only room we didn't walk into was mine, that first trip out. So we came through the house, dropped stuff off, went back outside, grabbed more groceries and bags, came back in the second time, and the sliding glass door was wide open. And we had all three just walked past it a couple of times, and it was not open minutes before. The only place the person who was in the house could have been hiding was in my bedroom. And I had one of those tall day beds that, they're 3 feet off the floor. And so likely whoever the home invader was, I don't know if it was the same individual or somebody else. But that was
what a
where we assumed he
violation
would
of
be
your
hiding.
privacy, though. Like, that just changes how you should feel safe in your own home. Did that just change completely your, like, did it feel like you had no safe place? I just,
Yeah. And I lived in the same house for 18 years. So that was always home, but
wow,
did it
right.
feel safe? No, it didn't feel safe.
So did you just always feel on guard all the time?
Yeah.
That's exhausting.
And, we lived in a nice neighborhood. We didn't live in the ghetto. We weren't, we were a middle upper class family. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My
Yeah.
dad worked for the government. I say that like he worked for the post office for 25 years.
Yeah.
Made pretty good money. Federal job.
Mhm.
It was a nice neighborhood. It wasn't like we were out in the ghetto or anything, but like I'd mentioned, my dad ran around with some unsavory type people, and
Mhm.
that attracts a certain element. Um, and so over the years, it was just one of those things where my mom and my brother and I, we were kind of, the three of us were together a lot, so we were always very protective of each other. And my parents fought all the time because of my dad's drinking, and he was not faithful to my mom, and there were a lot of
Mm.
issues. So when
Yeah.
I turned 18, my mom finally asked for a divorce. So they got divorced, sold the house, and they were like, well, me and my brother were like, well, you guys are on your own, good luck. Um, and so I was kind of forced to move out on my own. Making 18 years old, working a minimum wage job, did not have enough money to pay rent. So I was kind of forced into moving in with my boyfriend at the time, who I was
Mm.
had only been dating for 5 or 6 months. But
Oh,
my
wow.
mom had suggested, she's like, well, he's got his own place, and maybe you can go move in with him. And um, but my mom moved in with my grandma, my brother moved in with my cousin, my dad moved in with my uncle, and I couldn't really find anywhere to go. I didn't have any friends that were ready to move out yet. They were still all living at home with their parents, and so I moved out with my boyfriend just due to lack of options, really.
Mhm.
Um, he was 7 years older and ended up
Man,
being
I can relate to this story.
yeah,
Wow. Okay.
yeah. He was 7 years older. Um, and ended up being incredibly abusive. And I was sort of stuck. And it took me about 6.5 years before I was able to get out of that situation. Um, he, much like my dad, shocker, there's a pattern
Right.
here.
There's a
Um,
pattern. Yeah.
Much like my dad ran around with an unsavory type crowd. And therefore had unsavory type people around sometimes. Sometimes he pissed off the wrong person. Oh, sorry, can I say that on the sorry. Um, uh,
Oh, you'd be
trying to watch
surprised
my
the
mouth.
things say on this show. Yeah.
And so occasionally there'd be an unhappy person pounding on our front door. There was more than once where I had to uh, fight to keep the front door closed as somebody was trying to force their way in.
Okay, wait a second.
Um,
Stop. I have to ask you something. So, because you'd had so much experience, and I don't mean this in a good way, but you'd had a lot of, over a decade of experience of this type of behavior, right? Of people not banging on the door, but people being in your house and like the stuff you went
mhm.
through as a kid. Did you eventually normalize this so that you could deal with it? Like, did you become immune to it almost?
I think that's probably safe to say. I
Yeah.
probably did become immune to
A
it.
part of you probably had to
Hmm. Yeah,
desensitize yourself to it almost.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um, and I was, as a child, a fairly strong-willed child. I mean, there was a time when I was maybe 6 where it was late at night. My dad had had a bunch of drinking buddies over. My mom had been in bed for a couple of hours. My brother and my cousin and I were up in the family room, and the dads had all been sitting around the table drinking and playing cards, and then um, my dad passed out at the dining room table. The other guys left to go get some beer, and I thought they were gone, and they came back, an hour later. My dad still passed out at the dining room table, and one of his friends comes knocking on the door wanting to drag my dad out to go party, and
Oh
I
my
look out the
gosh.
window and there's hookers in the car, right? Uh, and ask how a 6-year-old, 7-year-old can identify a hooker, uh,
Wow.
because it was pretty obvious what they were doing in the car. Um, and
Wow.
anyhow, he was trying to wake up my dad who was, passed out, and I kept telling him, "You need to leave, you need to leave." And I got to the point where I was yelling, and he wasn't leaving. So I told him, I said, "If you don't, you're in my house. This is my house, and I told you not to be here, so you can't be here." And he kind of pushed me aside, and I stumbled back and bounced
Mhm.
off the wall, and that pissed me off.
Mm.
And I was a kid. I grew up with boys, so I
Right.
was scrapper, and
Right.
I was 6, 7 years old, and this
You
guy
still
was
are a scrapper, Lisa.
6'2", and grown man,
Yeah.
my dad's age, and
Yeah.
he made me mad. So I told him, I said, "If you don't leave right now, I'm gonna call the police." And he says, "Oh yeah, you go ahead, do that." So I did, and I picked up the phone and I called 911 and I said, "There's a man in my house right now. He's not supposed to be here. Um, and he's got a car full of people outside, and I told him to leave, and he's not leaving. And I want you to come." And I told the 911 operator my address. And so my dad's friend quickly left. He hightailed it out of there. My dad still passed out at the table, and they were gone. And then my mom got up because the police showed up, and
Wow.
she talked to them, and she was like, it was his drinking buddies. We're all fine. It wasn't a stranger. She, I apologize. It wasn't, a home, it wasn't a stranger. It was
Yeah.
a known associate. And then the police left, and my mom pulled me aside, and she said, she's like, "I'm so proud of you. Thank
Mm.
you for standing up for your dad, for yourself, for me." She said, "I was awake and I heard you do that whole thing, and I was just too afraid to get up and face him. And
Wow.
I'm proud of you for handling it." And I thought to
Wow.
myself, my mom was too afraid
Right.
to approach this guy, but she let me handle
Wow. And you were like 6?
it. 6 or 7.
That's
Um,
crazy. I just like
and
oh, you should
yeah.
write a book, Lisa. You should write a book.
So anyhow, uh, you know, I was a feisty one growing up,
Me
and
too.
excuse me. So when I started dating
What was that like in the
He
beginning?
It was great in the beginning.
Yeah.
Older guy, had his own car, his own apartment,
Yeah.
and all the cool things. He's the bad boy,
Yeah.
and but it, it was interesting because the more aggressive he started to get with me, towards me, the more I became defiant. Like, no, you're not gonna boss me around like this. Well, we'll watch
Mhm.
this.
That escalates
And
things, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah, and he was a total gaslighter, very manipulative, uh, complete narcissist, and
Give us an
everybody loved him.
example of that. Yeah. What for people that don't really understand what you mean, could you give us an example of
He,
manipulation?
he, it's hard to describe, but he knew how
Yeah.
to push my buttons to get me riled up. And
Sure.
he did it in a way that rather than me thinking, well, screw you, I'm leaving, it was he was able to manipulate me in a way to be like, well, you don't think I can handle this? Well, watch this as I stay and handle it, and I fight back,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, you know, daring me to leave because I was too weak, daring me because,
Mm.
"Oh, are you gonna cry right now because I'm being mean to you?" And I was like, "No, I'm not gonna cry, screw you."
Mhm.
And so it was this total just mind twist.
Yeah.
But, he would do things like, here and when I met when I met him, I was 100 pounds soaking wet, size 0, teeny tiny little thing.
Mhm.
Um, just gotten out of high school, straight A student, and he'd tell me I was fat, that I was ugly, that I was stupid, that I was not capable of doing this or that. Um, he would talk about other women in front of me, like, suggestively type comments about other women. Um, when he'd get mad, he'd punch holes in walls, he'd throw things, break things. Um, he was physically abusive towards me. He hit me on more than one occasion. Um, he threatened to kill me so many times. I can't even tell you how many times he threatened to kill me. He threatened to drive the car off the bridge. He threatened to shoot me. He threatened to stab me. He threatened to throw me out of a moving car. I mean, you name it, he threatened to do it. Um, he, you know, if I was making him mad, he'd threaten. He's like, "I'm gonna kill your cat tomorrow while you're at work if you keep doing this or that." Um, when I moved in with him, I didn't have any furniture, any of my own stuff because I lived in my parents' house. So it was his furniture, all of his stuff. He'd get mad at me and he'd tell me I wasn't allowed to sit on his couch. I wasn't allowed to sleep in his bed. I wasn't allowed to eat his food. Right. So I'd sit on the floor if he was mad at me because that was punishment, if you will. Um, I mean, the list goes on and on.
So I have a
Um,
question then. Did you stay because you were afraid, or did you stay because you were dependent, or both on him? Or what was the reasoning behind that?
uh, all of the above. I didn't have money to move out. I was constantly looking for an apartment, and I couldn't afford it. I would have needed two
And
roommates
he
to
knew
be
all
able to
this,
afford.
so he
Yeah,
knew
he knew.
exactly what
He
position you
he
were in.
knew he knew, yeah, financially that I was dependent on him. Um, I couldn't find any roommates over the years. I was constantly asking my friends if they wanted a roommate. Um, Part of it was I was afraid to leave because of the threats that he made against me and against my family. Um, Part of it was just a challenge because he would almost dare me to move out because I was too weak and I couldn't handle uh, his personality. I couldn't handle him teasing me. He never meant any of these things. He was always just he
Mm,
was teasing. It was a joke, and I couldn't take a joke, and
mhm.
um, so a lot of it was manipulation. But
Wow.
3 or 4 years in, I realized it for what it was. When I saw a friend of mine going through something similar, and I was like, "Why you should leave that guy. Why are you dealing with this?" And she was like, "Oh, like, you should talk, right? You're one to talk." And I realized she was right. Like, I was in the same boat.
Mm.
Um, and
So it must have
yeah,
been hard to have perspective when you're in it then.
it
Like
is.
now in hindsight, it's easy to see the red flags and all of the stuff, but like when you were in it and that time in your life, you were a lot younger then.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
I had no way to support myself.
mhm.
Um, Even the car that I was driving, I had a decent car when I first started dating him, and he had encouraged me to get a better car, something that was a little more reliable, and I couldn't afford a better car, so he was helping me with my car payment, right? And, um, so if I threatened to move out, he'd take my car away, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. Um, and then if he'd get mad at me, he'd show up at my work and cause a scene at my job and almost got me fired a couple times. Um,
So when did all this come to a head? Where did this lead? And how long did this go on for?
About 6.5 years. I was with him for about
Wow.
6.5 years. 18 until just before I was right about 25.
Was there
Um,
an incident that happened? What was the turning point for you?
um, I don't know that there was one real turning point. Um, it was just things just kept escalating,
Mm.
uh, and I wanted to get out, and he just my family and friends loved him, right? And I was asking my family and friends for help, and nobody believed the things that
Oh,
I was telling them about him because he was a complete con man. And it wasn't until um, some friends of mine saw the way he was acting towards me that they started wondering if maybe some of the stuff that I was saying might be true. And I was starting to able to have conversations with people about it. That was like, okay, maybe they believe me. Um,
wow.
and I finally worked up the courage to get out. I couldn't find anybody to move out with, and so I was going to college. I started at community college, something he kept trying to deter me from doing. Uh, but while I was going to college, I applied for and got accepted into a Disney college internship program, and this was my window out. I was going to move to Florida and do the Disney internship and take that as an opportunity to get away. And so I took my cat, dropped it off at my aunt's house, and they were gonna watch my cat for 9 months while I was out of the state. And that was my chance to end things with him. And things were going pretty good in Florida. I packed up everything, moved to Florida all by myself, and, um, about 4 or 5 months in, uh, he started calling my phone, and I didn't wanna talk to him. But eventually I just got sick of the phone ringing, so I answered it, and he wanted to know he was talking to me like we were still together. He
Mhm.
accusing me of cheating on him with the guys in Florida, and I wasn't seeing anybody, I was not doing any of that. But in my mind, it was over. I was finally free and
Mhm.
done, and he just started talking to me like everything was as it had always been. And I told him, "You're crazy. I need you to stop calling." And then one day, the guard station calls. It was the Disney program that I lived in, that I worked at. It was an internship, so they provided housing, right, apartment complex, and I lived in an apartment with other people, like other girls, 2 girls to a room, private apartment with a guard station, and a gate, and you couldn't get in and out of the property unless either you lived there or you were on the guest list, and you had to give them 24 hours notice for a guest to be admitted onto the property.
I bet you were happy about that.
It was great.
Yeah.
But one morning I get a phone call from the guard station that there's some guy out here causing a scene and I need to get out here and take care of it. Well, and it was he somehow had found out my address. The best thing that I can imagine that I can assume is that he'd found a postcard because I was sending postcards to some friends and family while I was gone. And I'm guessing he saw one of my postcards and got my address. He drove to Florida.
Wow.
He picked up my cat. He went and knocked on my aunt's door, got my cat. She gave it to him without even talking to me about it.
Oh no.
And he brought my cat to Florida. Got into a fist fight with the guard at the guard station.
Oh my God.
The police showed up and they chased him off. And so then he calls me from a phone, a couple miles down the road, and he was like, "I need you to come meet me right now. If you don't come and meet me, I'm gonna throw Jasmine in the, over to the crocodiles." And there's alligators, crocodiles everywhere. So I went down to go meet him, and the guard was writing a police report, and I was immediately kicked off the property and kicked out of the program. And so they gave me 24 hours to get all my stuff and get out. And I had to do that under escort. So now I'm in Florida with no car and all of my belongings and nowhere to go on the side of the road. So he came and he picked me up. And we weren't going to stay in Florida because now I didn't have a job. He didn't have a job. And so we started driving back across the country. Ended up stopping in Arizona for a little while. And he sold his car, traded it in for another one. And we stayed in Arizona for maybe 3 or 4 months before we came back to Oregon. He somehow managed to, at the DMV, list the car that he sold as having the title when he didn't. And so he sold the car. And what ended up happening was, before he came to Florida, he had sold his car to some guy for a few $1,000s and some drugs. And then he, with the second set of car keys, stole that car back from the guy he sold it to and drove across the country with it.
Whoa. And then sold it in Arizona?
And then sold it in Arizona.
Whoa.
And when the finance company stopped getting payments on the car, they put a track on it and had it repossessed. So the people in Arizona who bought it had it repossessed from their front driveway, having no idea that any of this stuff had happened. And they ended up hiring a private investigator, and they tracked down to the apartment that we were back in Oregon.
Wow.
And that was actually, I think that was when I was done, just absolutely done, when I had a private investigator knocking on my front door looking for him.
This is wild.
The guy that he ripped off started looking for him and looking for me. I managed to, at that point, finally I broke up with, I moved in with my grandma, just so I had a place to stay. And found a job, just any job that I could find. Excuse me.
Wow. This is just stranger than fiction. Now, I noticed you said that that there were drugs involved. So was he a drug user then? Was that part of the equation?
He was buying and selling weed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Before it became legal, he was buying and selling weed.
Mm-hmm.
So I had left him, moved out, completely ended it this time, and with my dad and my dad's help, my dad pretty clearly told him to leave me alone, and he was kind of afraid of my dad, so he finally started leaving me alone. But now I have some drug dealer who's looking for and pestering me. And I was working at Subway. I was 24, I think, by this point. Working at Subway, and at Subway, you know, I'm working by myself, closing shift until 11 o'clock at night. And I would get these. I remember I was standing there by myself, and some guy comes in and make him a sandwich, and he's just giving me all kinds of creeps. He's off. He's staring at me. He's looking at me weird. I just kept thinking, like, this guy's like the big bad wolf. I don't know what it is about him, but he's creeping me out. I give him a sandwich and he leaves, and I was just so glad he was gone. A little while later, I pick up my cell phone in the back, and I've got a voicemail, and he's like, "Hey, Lisa, this is so and so. I'm looking, and thanks for the sandwich. I want you to know that I've been watching you every night through the window. Told me what I've been wearing, the way I'd had my hair the last couple of days, and told me that if I didn't help him find that he was going to come after my family, that he knew where I lived. He gave me my grandmother's address and said that he would go in and kill her if I didn't hand over. And that made me mad. So I called the guy back and I went off on him, and I was like, "Look,
You did?
I did. I was like, I'm not with that loser anymore, and you can tell him that if you find him, he owes me some money, and he owes my family some apologies. So you let me know if you find him first, but you need to back off and leave me alone, because you don't know me, you don't know my family, you don't know who you're dealing with, and I better not see you." I was mad. I was really mad.
Wow.
But what was I gonna do? You know, I lost it. I went off on the guy. A couple
What was
days
his
later,
reaction to that?
he
Did
laughed
he
at
stand
me.
down? He laughed. Okay.
He laughed at me.
Okay.
A couple days later, I was walking out of Circuit City, which I don't even think is open anymore, but it's kind of like a Best Buy. And I was walking to my car, and there was some guy leaning up against my car, and I'm like, "That's the same guy." I recognized him. And he walked up and was trying to, just by his body language, I could tell he was trying to intimidate me. And I just got unhinged. I went off on him. I had learned with that if I acted scared, he would aggress.
Yeah.
And if I got aggressive back, he'd back off, and we'd be more of a stalemate. And when I saw this guy leaning against my car, smirking like he thought he was going to get the best of me, I thought about my grandmother and my mom, who was living there at the time still. And I got to the point, like, I don't care if I die today.
Wow.
He's coming with me, and I'm going to rip his face off. And that's all I
Wow.
could think of. And I went off on him, and I had my hands on his shirt at one point, and I was just shaking and shaking and shaking him. And I spit in his face, and I was yelling, and I threatened him, and I said, "You don't know who my dad is. You don't know who my family is, and I'll tell you what, if I ever see you again, you'll be waking up dead. My family will take care of you." And I lost it. And I told him that if I ever saw him again, he was a dead man. Not to come near me, not to come near my family, not to ever call me again. And I kind of scared him.
You went, because you went crazy woman on him.
I did. I went absolutely psychotic.
Yeah.
Absolutely psychotic.
I'm sure he didn't expect that.
I don't think he did. I mean, he had, 12 inches on me and probably 100 pounds,
Yeah. You're still lucky that one of those times you didn't just get like waylaid into the concrete, though, to be honest, because it must have just been the shock factor.
I think so. Somebody wasn't really expecting that reaction.
Yeah.
But I certainly started causing a scene, and people in the parking lot were starting to turn and look,
Yeah.
and before I know it, there's 4 or 5 witnesses standing there watching. Um, he got in his car, drove away, and that was the last I heard of him. And then a person who was a mutual friend of mine called me a couple of days later, and he said, "I just ran into," and he wanted me to tell you that he owes you an apology and that he's really sorry and he is not going to bother you anymore.
Did he
And that
find
was,
you? And then I wonder.
I don't know. I don't
Mm.
know. And I didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he had heard enough about um, my dad and his acquaintances that he may have taken me seriously.
Mm-hmm.
My dad ran around with some bikers, and they're some pretty serious people. So,
Did you ever have to get like a restraining order or anything like that? Some kind of court protected thing?
I probably should have. I didn't, but I probably should have. I kept all the messages and text messages and voicemails that were on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I didn't at the time. I didn't even I don't even think I knew if I knew what they were.
Mm.
But he finally left me alone. But at that point, it was I went and I got my concealed carry permit
Yeah,
because
that's where I was going next.
yeah, that's when I got my permit because I just never knew. Like I didn't know like is this guy really gone and
Yeah.
who else is looking for him.
Yeah. You decided to get your permit, and then what happened? Did you get any training with that?
Um Not a lot of training. I mean, I went to the local gun store, gun shop, and I got my I took a 4-hour class, got my permit.
Mm.
Um, I had been shooting off and on for hobby and for fun ever since I was a kid, so I knew how to shoot.
Mhm.
Um, I carried in an ankle holster because the boot cut jeans, bell bottom jeans were in, and that was an easy way to conceal. And
Yeah.
um, I didn't really think much of it. But over the years, I would run in, I'd turn around and boom, there he was in the mall. I'd
Wow.
turn around and boom, there he is at the movie theater where I'm standing in line. I'd be at my friend's house and boom, there he is showing up. I turn around and
Wow.
there he is in the parking lot at Target. And
Was this a small town?
it's not a
Oh.
terribly small town, but um, I don't know if it was coincidence. I managed to avoid him on all those situations. There was one day I was driving through traffic and I look over and there he is in traffic next to me, and it's like, why can't I
Wow.
not ditch this guy?
Yeah.
I had a couple of instances where I had issues on my credit because he was trying to open up cards in my name, and that was another thing that he had done. Is he had memorized my bank accounts, my social security number, and he embezzled all kind of money out of me. Opened up secret uh, accounts in my name and charged up all kinds of things. And then this is when eBay first started, and he'd buy things online. He bought a Dell computer, a Gateway computer under my name. I didn't know he even opened an account. And then he'd turn around and sell it online.
Wow.
He bought some $4,000 mountain bike and then sold it on eBay. And so he was doing all these things. And then I got a report. I went to go get some rims and tires for my car at Les Schwab. And they were like, well, we have an account. Somebody came in yesterday trying to open an account and they listed themselves as your spouse. And I was like, I'm not married. I don't know. And he had tried because he couldn't get his own financing. He listed me as a co-signer
Oh.
and tried to open up a Les Schwab account. Well, I went in the very next day because they hadn't been able to reach me to confirm. And then I went in the
Oh.
very next day at the same store to try to get an account. They're like, why are you doing this? You got one from yesterday. And, yeah, so I had my concealed carry permit because I felt like although he wasn't harassing me, it was like every time I turned around for years, there he was. And it just, I wasn't really sure what to think of it. A few more years goes by, I had my permit for 4 years, and then it expires. And I let it expire because eventually I just didn't see him anymore. And I heard through the grapevine that he moved away, and that was that.
That was relieving.
Mm-hmm.
So then there were so what were the things that led up to you getting your permit the second time then? Weren't there some close calls?
Yeah.
Okay.
So about
Never-ending adventure in your life, I swear.
I used to tell my friends never walk into a bank with me because that'll be the day it gets robbed. I have a way of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Um, yeah. So about 10 years ago now, there was a shooting at the Clackamas Town Center, and I was on my way there when it happened. I was meeting a friend to go dress shopping. We had an event, like a formal Christmas event, and she wanted to do some shopping, so I was going to meet her at the Clackamas Town Center. And I was about 3 blocks from the mall when she called me, and she said, "Hey, I just got a flat tire. Will you come and sit with me? I'm waiting for AAA." And so I turned around, I found her, and I sat with her. We're just sitting in her car waiting for the AAA guy to show up, and like sirens just start blaring and emergency vehicles just start going by. And I could, essentially see them all from where we were. And so we got lucky. It was by the grace of God that we were not actually in the mall when the shooting went down. About 2 days later, I was watching the local news, and one news channel mentioned this one time, and they never repeated it. But the reason that the shooting had stopped was because there was a concealed carry holder in the mall, and the guy, the concealed carry holder, drew his gun and pointed it at the shooter. But he didn't take a shot because he didn't have a clear shot, and he wasn't confident in his skills and ability to make the shot without hitting an innocent person. And I guess there was a woman and her child nearby. And so the concealed carry holder did not take a shot. But that was enough for the shooter to stop what he was doing, and he turned around and he ran, and I guess he ended his own life. But when I heard that story on the news, I thought, okay, good guy with a gun was there. That's how it stopped. I should really think about getting my permit again. And I had just gotten married, and I was living in Portland, and I hadn't been in Portland for very long. And so I started talking to my then husband, about it, saying, I think I want to get a gun. He wasn't really big on guns. He had a shotgun and had shot clays a few times, but didn't really know a lot about guns. And he knew that I was a gun person, but he wasn't so sure that getting me carrying a pistol around was a good idea. About a couple days later, middle of the day, 3 o'clock or so in the afternoon, I was out running errands. And I pull into the driveway at the rental house we were at, and there were these guys standing in the front yard. And there was a white Jeep backed up to my side yard, and there were 4 guys, and there was a 5th guy sitting in the Jeep. And there were these stack of like paving bricks that were stacked up against the house, and the landlord had been planning on putting in a little pathway. And I see these guys, and the one guy's taking a brick, handing it to his friend. The next guy's taking it, handing it off, and they're loading them in the back of this Jeep. And I sat there and I'm looking at these guys thinking, well, this doesn't look like the normal work crew. I don't know what's going on. As I was sitting there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, the 4 guys surrounded my car. And the 5th guy stayed in the Jeep the whole time, but the 4 other guys surrounded my car. And I kind of just freaked out, and I was getting ready to put it in reverse when one of the guys stood behind my car. So I stopped because I'm thinking, I don't want to run somebody over.
Right.
And I didn't quite know
what was going on.
And it hadn't processed yet that maybe I was in danger. And then I had I went to go hit my door locks to make sure that they were locked, and they had already been locked, but I missed the door lock button and I hit the window button.
Oh,
And so the rear passenger window ended up rolling down about this far. And the guy that was behind the car moved to the side of the car and he started like sticking his hand in the window, trying to get his hand in the window. And the guy that was standing next to my door tried opening up the door handle, trying to get in.
jeez.
And that's when I realized, like, okay, this is a bad situation.
Yeah.
So my phone was connected to my car, so I called my husband, who was inside the house. He was in the house,
Oh, geez.
and
He had
so
no
I
idea this
called.
was happening?
No, he didn't. And so
Oh,
I was like, "Get outside! I'm outside, and these guys are trying to get me." And he had been taking a nap. He was sleeping on the couch. And he's like, "What?
oh,
What?" And I said, "I'm outside. There are guys out here, and they're trying to get me. Come help me. Call the
mhm,
police."
mhm.
And so next thing I know, the garage door opens up. My dog, I had a German Shepherd mix. He comes running out underneath the garage door, and my my then husband comes walking out with the one shotgun, the one gun we had in the house. It was a Remington 870, and I don't even think we had ammo for it. I don't think we had shells for it. I think it was just empty. And he's got it in his hand, and he's got
Yeah.
his phone in the other, calling the police. And he levels the shotgun at the guy closest to him, and they just stop and they turn around and they just stared at him. They just
Wow.
stood there,
They
and it
weren't
wasn't an
deterred.
they were not the least bit afraid, and it wasn't until my dog Sam bit the guy that was closest to my door. He bit
Mhm.
him in the butt, and that's when they finally started to move, and they, like, casually, slowly sauntered back to their car, and
Really?
yeah, they were not the least bit concerned, but then my dog bit a second guy, and he latched onto his leg, like, really, really hard, and then he started screaming, and that's when they kinda scrambled and finally left. Um,
Wow.
the police never showed up. They told us that no crime had been committed, so what was the point of coming out? Here's your case number.
Wow.
And I was like, "Okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm getting a gun, and I'm gonna learn how to really, really be good with it because I don't wanna be that guy in the mall who pulls a gun out and doesn't know if I can hit my target. I'm not gonna
Mhm.
be the person who throws a gun in my purse and hopes for the best."
Yeah.
So that's when I started taking shooting really seriously. I bought a gun. I found a range and I started going to the range shooting pretty regularly. Um, and the guys at the range started to recognize me and they're like, "Hey, you know what? We have this ladies' night. You should come check it out." And so I went and showed up and I crashed this. It turned out to be a well armed woman night
Okay.
at the local range, and the two
Mhm.
ladies that were kind of running it, they saw me shoot, and they're like, "You need to come over to Tri County. We have this other group at Tri County, and you need to come join us. You need
Cool.
to come." And so
Thank God
I
for
met.
women like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, they had what they called Ladies League, and it was, weekly, weeknight, meetups where it was learning to draw from a holster, defensive style shooting. The lady who ran it, Catherine, she was a three-gunner. She shot every discipline under the stars, and, I started getting some training, uh, through the ladies group. Not really understanding how well trained these women were. Catherine was a national level competitor. She's
Wow.
trained with some of the best names out
Mhm.
there. Um, and so I started shooting for a couple of years. And then I I had a friend who was dealing with an ugly divorce, and he started threatening her and their boys.
Mm.
So I brought her to the range and I told her, I said, "You need to get a gun," because he showed up at her house one night in the middle of the night at her apartment and broke in and actually took their toddler. And
Oh my gosh.
um, he brought the little boy back, but she was afraid that it was going to happen again. And so I said, "You need to get a gun." he essentially kidnapped his own child. But they hadn't filled out a custody agreement or anything yet, and so she wasn't really sure how to handle it. So I took her to the range and I taught her how to use a gun, but she was still really nervous about it. So I talked her into going out to Nevada with me. There was this place I had kept hearing about called Frontside out in Nevada, and it
Mhm.
was a 4-day defensive handgun course. And I was like, "We're going to go do this thing. You're coming with me, and you're gonna really learn. You're gonna immerse yourself in it." And they had a shoot house, and it was 4 days of shooting, malfunction drills, all the stuff. Um, and I'll never forget the way it impacted her. Because when I first met her, she was this tall, beautiful woman. She was 5'10", looked like a freaking runway model, confident, carefree. And when things started going ugly with her husband, she started turning inward and she started keeping her eyes cast down. She stopped making eye contact with people. Her whole shoulder started to hunch over and she was just broken.
Mm.
And after we came back from Nevada, I took her to the range one more time and I put her through some drills. And the transformation in her was incredible. She started holding her head up high again. She started walking with her shoulders back, walking up straight. She started making eye contact again. She started to laugh and smile again. She had confidence. She knew that she had the skills and the willpower to defend herself and her kids if her ex-husband ever came back. And it transformed her.
What a gift.
And that's when I decided that I was going to help other people make that change.
Mm. You're getting me right here. Because that really is at the end of the day, you and I are both instructors, right? And at the end of the day, that is really what it's all about, especially when we see women come into to train. It is really remarkable the transformation that can happen in a relatively short amount of time. Wouldn't
Yeah,
you say? Yeah.
it can happen quickly.
Yeah.
You can tell when suddenly someone's demeanor goes from being afraid, fearful, timid to
Mhm.
free,
Yeah. Yeah.
confident, self-assured.
Which,
It's
I
freeing.
think that we both in our own ways, in our own stories, in our lives, I think probably sort of yearned for that when we were younger because there were so many things that happened. And this is about you, not me, but that were out of your control,
Mhm.
and that's probably a big part of it.
Yeah.
So, you know, I imagine that you believe now that that was in the cards for you, that was supposed to happen, that built you into who you are now,
Mhm.
so that you can become a person who can identify people who have been through similar experiences and you've had those similar emotions, those similar struggles, and you can really help those people and understand them better, I believe. I think that's part of what makes you so special. What I mean,
Thanks.
yeah.
I've lived through it. It's not easy. Uh, it takes a strong, determined person to to walk away from living a life of abuse and surviving repeated violence throughout your life and be able to break that pattern. I never got in trouble with the law. I never ended up messed up on drugs, on the street, prostitution. These are all things that other people may find themselves in after living through some of the things that I lived through, right?
Mhm.
And I had my family cared about me. You know, they loved me. They weren't in a position to really help me, but they were there with love and encouragement. And it was really up to me to determine my life outcome. I had to do it on my own. So going back to college, uh, getting my degree, getting a job, walking away from a life of ugliness and moving forward and deciding to utilize my experience to help other people. And it's not something a lot of other people can do. Um, I've met I've met women who have experienced things that I've experienced, and they're not in good places. They've made some really, really bad life choices. Uh, so I just thank God that I had him by my side to keep me on the straight and narrow.
I was
Um,
just getting ready to ask you
yeah,
what do you credit why didn't you take that path that's so common to just have a pattern in your life that just continue? What was there a wake up moment, or was it just this slow progression of healing that you had to do, or what did that look like for you?
I can't really say that there was one thing. It's just ingrained in me to fight. I've never had another choice.
Yeah.
Not fighting was not an option. Um, I'm I it
Well, you
there was
said
never
you
any
were a
other
scrapper, so
consideration.
there you go. So
There was
that's
never any other consideration. I don't know. There was I what I wanted to do, and I did it. I knew what I wanted to do, and I did it.
you made up your
Uh,
mind.
I made up my mind. My mom used to say that my guardian angel must have been a cat, with 9 lives because the number of close calls that I've had in my life, is
Yeah,
absurd.
yeah.
And either I have a lot of guardian angels or one who's got 9 lives like a cat to keep up with me. Uh, I have to admit though, as I've gotten older and when I started carrying a gun in training, uh, situational awareness becomes something that once I learned what situational awareness was and recognized that it was an actual concept and not just street smarts of a kid who learns how.
Right.
But it like there was a word for it and a
Yeah.
concept and books about it and
You've been
training classes
training for
about
it
it.
your whole life.
um, but once I started carrying and getting actual formal training, I realized that I stopped having these close call situations.
Really?
And I'm guessing it's the way that I started carrying myself. My
Hmm.
level of awareness, my level of conscious thought about what's going on around me, uh, paying attention to potential threats,
Mhm.
just because I knew that threats were a real option,
Mhm.
a real possibility. Uh, so I'm guessing as I was younger, I probably looked more like an easy target, probably looked more like a victim because um, there was a time where I was defeated and beaten. And when I
Mm.
decided I wasn't going to be anymore, your
Mhm.
whole body language changes
Mhm.
and that projects. And if you do any study of the criminal psychology and the criminal selection process, I think I was automatically disqualifying myself as a potential victim just because the way I started walking and carrying myself and being aware and recognizing what potential threats might be and where they might be coming from. So I haven't really had a lot of terrible close calls in the last 15 or so years. Part of it might be because of the people that I stopped associating with.
Yeah.
Um, Probably, let's say 20 years actually. Um, uh, but I disassociated with that element of people. But also I have the confidence that I've always been able to take care of myself, and I will absolutely do it again if the moment arises. I have a pretty strong uh, sense of self-preservation,
Yes,
and
you do.
and um, I think people pick up on, and the criminal element probably picks up on that pretty well.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
so now I'm at the point where I want others to learn
Right.
that.
So
So
you became an instructor, and then you started a company, then you also started a Girl and a Gun chapter in your
mhm.
area. So that's a lot. When did that happen again?
Yeah, yeah. So in 2018,
Okay.
I was working full time as a graphic designer, and the the company I was working for got bought out, and there was a mass layoff, and over 200 people got laid off, and so they paid for a lot of us to go back to college on their dime, right? And so
Oh,
I was doing finishing my bachelor's degree online, and had a lot of free time because school kind of
nice.
came easy for me. Right? I was like, okay, I'm 5 hours a day of college coursework, and now what am I going to do with my time? I'm bored, right? So a friend of mine, um, he was like, "Well, Lisa, you can do anything you want right now. They're paying for your college. They're paying for your living expenses.
Wow.
You've got 2 years where they're going to pay you to stay at home and go to college.
Yeah.
You can do anything for these next 2 years. What do you want to do?" I said, I don't know. I'm not sure." And he was really, but all the stuff that you've been going on, all the things you told me, and I told him about, the friend of mine I just gotten back from Vegas, and he's like, "You really don't know what you want to do? Think about it."
Oh.
And I said, "Oh, I'd like to teach others how to shoot." He goes, "Yeah, obviously, go do it." And
Go do it.
so I did.
So
Uh,
did. I love that. So I did.
yeah.
That's
Then
beautiful.
started my company. I started working at the local range where I'd been practicing. I had my foot in the door because I was volunteering doing some graphic design for them, just because the club needed it.
Mhm.
And so I kind of knew some of the right people, and I was like, "Hey, I'm an instructor now. How do I do this? Point me in the right direction." And and they're like, "Actually, go talk to this guy over here. He's looking for somebody, and I think you'd be a good fit." So that's how I got my foot in the door actually teaching. I got my first NRA credential, but
Yeah,
um, and I interviewed a few instructors that I knew, like, how do I do this? And
yeah,
job shadowed a few, and then um, I shadowed the training company at Tri County where I work, and they hired me, and I was very fortunate because the guy that runs that training company had learned from Mass Ayub and Tom
oh,
Givens and
wow,
Sieglander and all the big
yeah,
names, and so he knew his stuff, and I didn't know any of those names at the time, and so I
yeah,
didn't know that I was getting trained from some people who had some really good training credentials. Um, that's how I got started, and then the Girl in a Gun program. I've been running the Ladies League. I had ended up taking that over because the Catherine, the lady who had started it, moved to a more gun friendly state, and
mm,
they didn't want the ladies club to die, so I took it over. But it was a lot of action shooting, IDPA, USPSA style stages, and that's a lot of stuff to set up for one
yeah,
person.
no
Walls and
kidding.
barricades, barrels and steel targets, and so I did that for 2 years, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm
Yeah.
not strong enough to lift all these heavy things. And and so I tried finding a different program, and then I found Girl in the Gun, and I was like, well, they've already got it all figured out. And so I'm just gonna
Right, they do.
I wanted to bring a local chapter to this area, and well, they didn't even have one in Oregon. So I was like, well,
Yeah,
I'm gonna start one. And that was 2 years ago. And now the Girl in the Gun chapter, we meet twice a month. I have about 40-ish members. We have anywhere from 5 to 15 that show up on a given night.
yeah,
We compete together. We shoot together. We do other things, non-shooting things together. And this last year, we did a bake sale fundraiser and raised $1,000 for the local domestic violence women's shelter.
wow.
Um, and
That's
so
nothing to sneeze at. That's really A bake sale, you said?
A bake sale, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
So we made about $800 worth of money from the baked goods, and then I pitched in the rest to make it around $1,000, and we sent it a check to ARMS, the Abuse Recovery Missionary Services. It's a local domestic violence shelter in Washington County, Oregon.
Wow.
And so that's going to become a regular thing. We're going to be doing fundraising for them on a pretty regular basis now, just because it's, a lot of the girls that come to Girl in the Gun or any sort of ladies training group have gone through some sort of domestic violence situation, and they want to train with other women because it's men that have made them wanted to go get a gun in the first place. And so when I started asking for suggestions on a local fundraiser, I was like, well, who do you want? Do you want to donate to the Humane Society? Do you want to donate to the local police? What do you, and they kind of looked at me with blank faces because I'm the one that wanted to do the fundraiser. And I was like, well, I think it'd be cool if we donated to the local domestic violence shelter. And everyone was like, yes, let's do that. And so I and my friend did a little bit of research, and we found ARMS, and so that's the charity that we're going to donate to on a regular basis. And I've got flyers that I hand out for people. I hide them in like ladies' rooms on the back of the doors, and there's flyers and tear off sheets that
grassroots. I love it.
Yeah. Telling people, trying to get them to be aware of what domestic violence symptoms look like. A lot of people don't even realize that they're in a domestic violence situation until something physical happens.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get into next is what are some of those red flags, warning signs? Because it seems as though, based on your experience, you said it started off good, and then it escalated to this, and then to it's like a sliding slippery slope, it sounds like, and a very dangerous one.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
Name calling, belittling, making fun of, controlling finances, controlling what you do with your time, controlling who you do and don't see, interrupting your work, your job, interrupting relationships with friends and family, saying what you can and cannot wear, talking down to you, saying like you're not capable, you're useless, you're worthless, you're replaceable, threatening to do things to your pets or your children, threatening to do something to you if you leave, threatening to do things to themselves. Like, and in my case, he always threatened to self-harm if I left. He always threatened to commit suicide if I left. And it's all forms of manipulation. Pressuring you to drink or smoke or do drugs, pressuring you to do, sexual acts or favors, pressuring you to dress a certain way, not dress a certain way. There's all kinds of things out there, the financial abuse, controlling money, putting it in a situation where you can't afford to leave, or you're financially dependent on that person, so you can't afford to get out. Being told how you can and cannot spend your own money. There are a lot of things that people don't necessarily see as abuse, but as maybe just a strict relationship, and they need to understand that abuse comes in all forms. It's not just physical. It can be emotional. It can be financial. And so some of the flyers and brochures that I hand out mention what some of those things are. And there's a local toll-free number hotline that you can call. There's a number that you can text for help. If you go on their website, there's a live chat that you can talk to people.
What website is that?
If I may, there is a phone number, and it's the abuse hotline.
Yeah, I'll put it in here.
And the phone number is 1-800 799 SAFE.
Safe?
SAFE, SAFE.
Okay.
And you can text 88788 to text with somebody.
88788. Okay.
The website is just thehotline.org. And I would encourage people, if they feel like maybe they're in a domestic violence situation, an abusive situation, or maybe something that they care about is an abusive situation, to check that out as resources. Because getting away can be scary. It can be incredibly frightening, especially if you have children or pets or loved ones that you're worried about their safety for leaving. I know for me, I got to the point where I didn't care if he committed suicide if I left, and I didn't care if he tried to kill me if I left.
Wow.
Dying would have been better than staying in the situation that I was in. But I didn't have any children to think about. And I did have pets, but I had to finally tell myself that if my cat died because I left an abusive situation, that would be devastating, but I still needed to leave. In fact, when I did finally move out, he swallowed a bottle of lithium and ended up in the hospital. He called me as he was doing it, so I called his parents and I told them, look, I'm not with him anymore, but you should probably go check on him. He told me he just did this thing.
Oh my
And they
gosh.
told me that I was lying, and I was like, hey, you know what? You're his
Oh,
mother. I'm telling you, this is your son. Do with it what you want. And I hung up and I washed my hands of it. And she actually sent his dad over, and the police came and they found him. He had swallowed a lot of lithium, and took him to the hospital. And he was in the hospital for a few days. Of course, then I was the evil ex-girlfriend.
ugh.
So
What a mess. What a mess.
it was, but it's you get to the point where you just don't care, and there's no way to
Yeah.
live.
Yeah, no way
So
to live, yeah.
I want to do what I can to help people avoid being in that situation, or help them get out of that situation if they can.
And if people want to check out what you're doing, Lisa, I need to put that banner up too. Do you have a website?
I do. My website is pacwestdefense.com. And I have links to my training classes on there, my CHL classes, my Girl in a Gun sessions, introduction to handgun, intermediate handgun, defensive handgun. I've got some introduction to rifle classes coming up for 2024. I also contract with another couple of shooting companies in the area that I teach. I was a cadre on somebody else's team. But I teach at Tri-County Gun Club in Sherwood, as well as at Vancouver Rifle in here in Vancouver near my home, and a few other areas on location as requested. But it's the hardest part is taking that first step and getting started, right? So
It is. It
just take
is.
that first step.
Yep. Yep, and try to find somebody that you trust or think for you is approachable. I think, a lot of people come to me the same reason they come to you, because for
Mhm.
whatever reason, I don't know what that is, they just are like, "This seems like somebody who not only knows what they're talking about, but really has my best interests at heart," which we do.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
and I both really care a lot about people, and that's what this is about, and helping people, however we can. And so I'm just so fortunate to know you. I've been so blessed by you. You've become a dear friend of mine. Is there
Thank you.
anything else that you want to leave the audience with before we go? Is there anything we didn't touch on that you would like to?
Um, I think we've covered it. Just know that if you're out there and you're dealing with something, uh, ask yourself, would you want your mom to deal with this? Would you want your best friend or your daughter to
Hmm.
tolerate what you're tolerating right now? And if you say no, then you're probably not in a good situation. And there is help out there. There are people who care. Um, you know, I'm not a licensed therapist or anything like that, but reach out to somebody who cares. They can help you find someone to talk to.
Mhm.
There are resources out there, so check out the website. Check out those resources. Call the hotline. Um, but there are ways to get out, and there are people who are there to help. Um, and it's scary, uh, but humans are resilient, and the sooner you do it, the sooner you can move on with your life.
Yeah, and you know what? I think God has big plans for us, and the better off that we are to be able to move past things that have happened to us in our life, then the more good work we can do to help others. That's what I believe. And
Mhm.
I do also believe he's sovereign and he puts us in those situations for a reason, even though it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to us. It's really more about his plan than ours. And I think trusting that's really important. And that's hard to do too. So if you're in that situation,
Mhm.
I know that seems
Yeah.
probably insensitive of me to say, doesn't it, Lisa? But in hindsight though,
Mm.
would you agree?
Yeah. I excuse me. Take the first step. Acknowledge that you might need help, and then ask for help.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that we've covered everything we want to cover. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on the show. Um, you're doing great work. You're a wonderful human, a heart of gold, and you've done so much for me too. That could be a whole other show. But I really appreciate your time and your heart, and keep up the work. You're going to touch so many more people than you already have, and that's what it's all about.
Thank you.
Are you guys still there? Because I just realized that interview was a little longer than the interviews that I normally do. Tell me in the comments, what did you think of my interview with Lisa Stiers? Um, and if you're still here, I know how many of you are watching, I can see. If you're still here, type in the comments, I'm still here. And I'm going to draw tomorrow from the people that are watching live right now that say I'm still here in the comments. I'm going to draw a name and I'm going to send you a special surprise just for thanking you for staying until the bitter end. I truly appreciate you. So I do have a few announcements, and then I'm going to let you know what you can expect for next week. I'm looking forward to next week's show as well. The announcements. Defenders Live is now on all podcasts, all podcasting platforms, Spotify, iTunes, all of them. So you can go there if you prefer audio only. I only have like 6 of them up of however many we've done. So like this one would not be up yet. If you don't want to miss out on an episode in the future, go to defenders-live.com. Sign up for email notifications there. I send emails out every week. So if you want to stay in the loop, you can do that there. And I want to thank all of my paid supporters on locals.com. I just dropped episode 6 of Defenders Uncensored there. Defenders Uncensored is a series of roundtable discussions that I host where we talk about topics that might be considered controversial, but we don't think they should be. And that's the reason why they're on Locals and not on other channels. They're full of truthful conversations, sprinkled with slightly inappropriate humor. And they're a lot of fun, and I look forward to them every single time. So if you're interested in that, you can go to locals.com, go to the Discover tab, search for Defenders Live. That's where you can find those Defenders Uncensored episodes. Also, mark your calendars for January 31st. I'm going to do something a little bit different. my friend from Active Self-Protection, Mr. Neil Widener, and I are going to be hosting on both of our channels live simultaneously. He's going to be hosting on the Active Self-Protection app and me on my channels, and we're going to be doing 7 random questions with each other. So I guess I'll be in the hot seat. So you'll have to stay tuned for that. If you're interested in the Active Self-Protection app, you can get 30% off of that your first 3 months by going to watch.activeselfprotection.com and use the code DEFENDERS30 for 30% off at checkout. Okay, next week, what to expect. I have Mike Davis on next week from Made Man Coaching. Mike served over 14 years active duty in the Navy. He was medically separated due to injuries from his service. And after his hip injury, he went into surgery and he was walking with a cane for over 14 years. And after buying into all the things the doctors told him that he would never be able to do again, he became, in his words, overweight, lazy, impatient, and a miserable man. And he says he was on the verge of destroying his marriage and his relationships with his kids. And then everything changed when he decided to start working with a coach. He got his mindset, nutrition, and daily habits right and built systems to ensure long-term success. And he now has used that experience combined with his 20 years of training in leadership and personal development to build a program to help other men bridge the gap between the man they see in the mirror and the man they know they want to be. So I'm really looking forward to having him on next week. Same time, same place. It'll be next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And for all of you who stayed till the bitter end, I truly love you guys. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Until then, take care.